Hi everyone and welcome back to the Drawing Database. Professor Marc Leone, and today we're going to look at the drawings of and spend 15 minutes or so with the drawings of Pablo Picasso. So everybody knows Picasso, right? Spanish painter, sculptor, printmaker, ceramicist, sculptor, collage artist. One of the, if not the giant of the 20th century, born in 1881 and then died in 1973 and spent most of his life in France. And he's one of the, if not the giant of the 20th century. I like to say Picasso and Marcel Duchamp because of their influence on a whole range of artists in creation of different art movements. Picasso was responsible not only for kind of furthering realism when he was quite young, 17, 16, 17, 18, but also breaking ground in new art in Cubism, analytic and synthetic Cubism, and also looking at African art and also assemblage sculpture as well as collage. And so we see an artist that is at the top of the art world, certainly in his time, and still reigns quite strongly with influence. Depending on whether what you like about Picasso, that's certainly valid, but you can't deny his largesse and also his influence. So, if you ever get a chance, and if you're in Barcelona, to go to the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, please do so. It's a lovely place to see some of the earlier Picasso works, not some of the major masterpieces. You can see that in Spain, as well as around the world. Certainly, Guernica is in Madrid at the Sofia. But in the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, you can see some of the earlier works. And Picasso was an excellent draftsman at a very young age. His father was an artist and a teacher of drawing, and so certainly Picasso had some genes there, good for art making. Looking at this drawing, we see kind of a mid-career drawing from Picasso. Probably it looks like 1921 or so. I can't. Sometimes the European system is backwards from what we do in the U.S. or switched over. So this is probably around his mid-career, and we see some of the large influence from African art. The risk-taking is certainly in the scale and proportion, the squattiness, the stockiness, the change of scale and alterations of proportion and blockiness. It's very blocky, very blunt, but yet very powerful in its directness and also in its handling of not only contour line and charcoal, but also flatness as well. And then we see a little bit of cross-contouring from Picasso, really altering the sense of reality. And you can also say here probably an influence on Botero as well, I believe, Colombian artist. Here we see a lovely silhouette ink drawing from Picasso of Tauromaquia or Bullfighter, a picador here, raging against the bull. Picasso certainly was fascinated, obsessed with the bullfight in the ring, in the matador, and all the attendants for most of his adult life, and influence certainly in growing up in Spain. And we see a lovely kind of cutout attitude, spirit here. Could be collage. It looks to be a little bit modulated if you get closer to it, so I'm thinking it's probably an ink drawing if you see a little bit of the layering in through here. But we get what's really important is the spirit of the movement right down in through here, and the sort of grounding kind of in through here. That's important. But when you're using silhouetting and or collaging and or the mass filling of shape that he does, what's important is not only less about what's inside, but what is on the outside to make stronger issue of the essence of the shape as it plays against the negative space out here. So the positive space, are these black forms here painted, drawn and painted, and the negative space is what's on the outside. So also I think there's an influence here directly to African American artist, contemporary artist Cara Walker, who's a decidedly big name in the art world, of her cutouts that deal with African American issues of slavery and lynching, and essentially the tyranny of the history of African Americans in the United States, and certainly this drawing has an influence, I think, to or a foreshadowing to Cara Walker's work as well. When I was in middle school, when I was about 12 and 13, one of our drawing assignments was to take this drawing by Picasso, which is a line drawing of Igor Stravinsky, a famous composer, classical music composer of Picasso's time, and to turn the image upside down. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and rotate this. Would that be 180? Yes, it would be. So what we had to do is take a piece of paper of equal size and recreate the abstraction of the shapes in the line as best we could. And once we were finished with the drawing was then turned over, and to see how well we accomplished the idea of line, expressive line, and a direct kind of line. And so what's fascinating about this drawing is a little bit, you see the influence of Picasso's bulky kinds of hands and squatty quality in the head, in the face. So he's altering his sense of perspective and proportion somewhat, but still maintains control of the figure's likeness. So he looks just like Stravinsky. Notice the simplified line work in the head, the glasses that give three-dimensionality, and there's some 3Ds we get overlapping in through here with the lapel and the collar and the cuffs and the folds of the suit. This is also, I believe, we could say, a direct influence to an artist we'll look at later, which is British artist David Hockney, who was open about his influence from Picasso and did several, and has done, and is doing, still alive, several line drawings in this particular kind of vein from Picasso. And here we see probably what is best known from Picasso, and in a drawing form, in charcoal form. We have a smudged kind of background, kind of additive, subtractive, and an exploring of cubist space here with multiple viewpoints of the head, profile eyes. Almost we go back to Egypt, so we have a frontal nose, a profile nose in the same face. So we're getting different views of time, different views of the figure, a kind of abstraction and a flatness in here. There's the idea of movement and also patterning that goes along. It's fairly clunky for Picasso. Notice the nails. There's real liberty here, but there's a spirit of movement and a spirit of gesture, a spirit of African influences on Picasso. So we all are constantly influenced by other artists and other periods if we choose to do so, which is important. And we see that here from Picasso. I believe a portrait of one of his wives or mistress, Dora Maar, at this point, in certainly a kind of quintessential, iconic Picasso look. Here we see earlier Picasso, and again the idea now, the spirit of Picasso's drawings. I've seen this one in Barcelona for sure, and it's actually a sepia-toned color. This is the best copy I could find, and it's a wonderful academic study of mother and child, probably around his blue period that still dealt with expressive realism. So that's another period, the pink and blue period of his life. Earlier in his life when he was still unknown, and it has a nice, lovely quality, really academic control, but there's a looseness and freedom as he's studying the lovely sort of curvature and the elegance of the young hand and the young mother nursing the child here in charcoal. And we get to a more very violent, creatively destructive spirit from Picasso, the Taormina figures, the half man, half bull, Minotaur, spirit. These are probably etchings, drawings on a waxed plate of copper and or zinc, and we see a direct, scratchy, stylus line quality that's a little incongruent and kind of all over the place, really expressive, hatched and cross-hatched at times kind of lines, especially in the background. Then he builds up the darks in and around the mane of the bull there and downward. It's almost as if the animal is discovering and coming upon a female during sleep, and it's certainly perhaps sexually motivated and certainly a little bit more possibly violent. And then when we see that quite often from Picasso, there was a strong sense of destruction and kind of creative testosterone energy above and beyond what we had seen probably before from other artists. So it certainly was directed from Picasso in the late 19th and 20th century. And again, the wonderful drawing quality of line weight variation, the spirit of gesture moving the figure around that we see and through, because the focal points here, let's take some of that red off. And then again, we see a more expressive, looser and less controlled rendering from Picasso that makes a little bit less academic kind of rounding sense and more angular and more aggressive, and therefore kind of potent in his outlining, his line weight, and the slight shading on some of the forms to get into what's most important, which is the head of the bull in a human body form. And I thought I'd show you some galleried images of Picasso drawings, I believe from Aquavella Gallery, and you get to see some of the changes in style from Picasso over the years. Let's see if we can go a little bit deeper. They don't get too pixelated. We see some of the line and a little bit of tonal quality in the spirit of the drawings, very much influenced by the Renaissance. Then we see sort of early to mid-career Picasso that's still really looking at the Renaissance, really sculptural, but there's a blockier quality that we're starting to get from Picasso, where Cubism has influenced his work. I can't tell if he's had been working in Cubism at this time. I'd have to see the date on these, and then he went back to a sort of relaxed kind of realism here. And then we see the beautiful quality of the direct line drawings from these drawings here above. The real ink drawings were more outlined with a little bit of overlapping to show us just enough three-dimensionality. I think we can go in there now pretty nicely. That's pretty nice. So we can really get to see these very close. And we get to see that particular style as well. We'll take a look at this down below. This particular drawing of the same kind of idea of kind of romantic interlude of wealthy, perhaps, couple with a flute player, etc., and so on. The same kind of composition here too, side by side. We see these two, and then over here, young woman, lovely young woman here in a nice kind of linear study. There's a lot of spatial beauty going on in composition with a very minimal kind of quality of line. So this is probably an early mid-career Picasso when he was married, I believe, for the second time, and married to a woman probably ill-suited for him, a wealthy heiress, and he was certainly in kind of a more, I would say, a more claustrophobic environment. And here we see again the influence of Pontormo, certainly, and a little bit more flatness in Cubism, Picasso, in a relaxing of the spirit of the scale and proportion. What I love about, I'm glad I got to find these. I love these images to see the quality of difference in all of the drawing styles that we see. And let's go on. I think I have one more. Let's go to that one. And yes, here's our last one here. This really gives him range. If you take a look, go back at the last drawings that we just looked at, I remember them. They're a little bit more academic, a little bit more constricted in style and focus, a little bit more influenced by art history and Western art history. And then we come to see these drawings, and Picasso did many drawings to work out stylistic concerns in certainly spirit and attitude. We see Cubism and especially African masks in art influencing heavily into the spirit of these drawings. Let's go deeper into them and kind of take a gander as if we were in the gallery itself. These two seem to be now charcoal. This one here of a woman with more kind of a, again, relaxed, simplified perspective and more African qualities. And here we get even the face into that more jutting, sort of shield-like spirit we see from African art at the time, kind of wood. The idea of cutting into wood, and this kind of gives a feeling of that sort of textured quality with the added subtractive charcoal. Here we have a figure heavily abstracted and influenced by the spirit of Cubism, and certainly we see the continued use of gesture, the S curves almost undulating through in the head here, and a little bit of the leg and buttock and the belly coming through. So the spirit of what is still movement and rhythm from even an academic sense is still present in the drawing. So moving through, we see another drawing, Cubism, probably pastel, on paper, charcoal, same thing, relaxed scale in proportion, and certainly more planar. Same thing, certainly with that one. Very much a drawn kind of painting. Maybe it's drawing, maybe it's pastel. I'd have to get even closer to it. But we see the dramatic influence of African art in then boxed planes, in changes, in the flatness of the attitude. And this would come to influence many different sculptors, many different artists of his time, and still today. We don't see too many artists working in Cubism. It's a little passe now, but we certainly see Picasso's influence on architecture even, as well as other forms, assemblage, etc. Anthony Caro, for instance, Sir Anthony Caro. Again, I love the spirit of the ink drawing here with a little bit of tone to heighten the drawing. Sometimes it makes sense in the rendering of the form. Sometimes it's a little bit more illogical, meaning that it's used as its own device and not necessarily for three-dimensionality. We see another drawing, whoops, a little more pixelated. Here down below this drawing, very heavily cubistic in looking for planes and changes, and giving different dimensions of time. Certainly young girls with the spirit of their proportions altered and changed. And then we have two more. The above drawing much more cubistic with the darker kind of eye sockets moving downward, and then the last drawing here of a kind of a young girl, which reminds us a little bit of this one, more diagonal here, a little bit more careful and a little bit more rendered, but the obvious changes in body weight and scale and proportion give us a sense that she may not be Caucasian European, but perhaps influenced by African art, or maybe even Polynesian. It reminds me a little bit of Gauguin. So there we have a good, I think, overview of Picasso's drawings, and then it will be up to you to go and research more deeply and more heavily into what makes Picasso a giant of all of art history, especially the 20th century. Take care. Bye-bye.